buckle up, everyone, because we're diving headfirst into the whirlwind that was 2024.
Oh, yeah.
It was a year that felt like one massive international news alert after another.
Right.
So many of you reached out wanting a clearer picture of what actually went down on the global stage, how the American media covered it,
Yeah.
and what it all could mean for us moving forward.
It's a lot to unpack.
You bet it is. But consider this deep dive your cheat sheet.
Oh, I like that.
To 2024's biggest international Gotti hits the stuff with real long-term consequences.
The stuff that matters?
Exactly. And to help us untangle this global web, we've got our expert guide in the house ready to connect those dots and uncover the hidden patterns.
Well, I'll do my best. 2024 was certainly a year of seismic shifts.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of seismic shifts, let's kick things off in a region that's practically synonymous with upheaval.
Oh, you mean?
The Middle East.
Of course.
The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria was massive news.
Huge.
Papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post were all over it.
Absolutely dissecting it from every angle.
But beyond the headlines, what does this actually mean for the region?
Well, the thing about toppling a regime that's been in power for so long is that it leaves a power vacuum. And that can be incredibly dangerous.
Dangerous how?
It's like cracking open Pandora's box.
Oh, wow.
All sorts of groups, including some with very extreme ideologies, rush in to try and seize control.
So not just a change in leadership, but potentially total chaos.
Potentially.
I can see why that would make things even more unstable.
Exactly. And for the U.S., it means we're probably going to see increased pressure to get involved and try to prevent those extremist groups from taking root.
But it's never that simple.
Nope. You've also got Russia and Iran with their own agendas in Syria, and they're not likely to back down anytime soon.
So it's like everyone's trying to grab the same piece of the pie.
That's one way to put it.
And this pie is already pretty messy.
Oh, and it gets even more complicated when you add Israel into the mix.
Right, because they see the instability in Syria as a threat too.
Big time, especially with the simmering tensions between them and Iran. This could easily escalate into a proxy war, with each side backing different factions inside Syria.
It's like Syria's problems become everyone else's problem.
It's the nature of geopolitics.
And speaking of adding fuel to the fire, remember the targeted assassinations of those Hamas figures, Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar, back in 24.
Oh, yeah.
That was another curveball.
Right.
The Wall Street Journal called it a strategic move by Israel to disrupt Hamas. But the Atlantic argued it would only lead to more violence.
I think that's the big question, isn't it? Is targeted assassination ever justified, and what are the long-term consequences?
That's a tough one.
It rarely, if ever, leads to a lasting solution, and more often than not, it just triggers more retaliation.
It just keeps the cycle of violence going.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And then there's the broader Israel-Iran conflict, which foreign policy was saying got really intense in 2024.
It did. We saw attacks on crucial infrastructure, even nuclear facilities being targeted.
That sounds like a major escalation.
It is, and both sides seem to be digging in for the long haul, which makes the whole situation incredibly volatile.
Adding gasoline to an already raging fire.
A good analogy.
And speaking of throwing fuel on the fire,
Oh boy, here we go.
let's talk about the elephant back in the Oval Office, the return of Donald Trump.
Yeah, that was a shocker. I think it caught everyone off guard.
The media definitely went into overdrive,
Of course.
with the New York Times predicting some serious global fallout, especially with China and Russia,
Right.
while Politico was more worried about what it meant for American alliances and the domestic political scene.
Makes sense.
But I think we need to understand that Trump's America-first approach to foreign policy is likely to create some major waves internationally.
Definitely, we'll probably see him trying to renegotiate or maybe even ditching international agreements altogether if they don't seem to directly benefit America.
So basically throwing a wrench into any progress towards global cooperation.
Pretty much. And it's not even just the specific policies.
Okay, so what else is it?
It's Trump's unpredictability that makes it so hard for other countries to plan or trust the U.S. They're constantly on edge, wondering what he'll do next.
It's like he's playing poker with the fate of the world.
And unfortunately, the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking global trade security alliances, even the possibility of military conflict.
Okay, so while the Middle East was dealing with its own set of crises, we had Trump shaking things up globally.
It was a turbulent year.
But there was another big story unfolding that didn't get nearly as much attention.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
It was happening in Sudan.
Oh, right. Sudan.
What started as a power struggle there quickly spiraled into a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah, it was bad.
The Washington Post was one of the few outlets consistently covering it. And they were painting a pretty grim picture of a country falling apart.
You know, it's a classic example of a conflict that gets overlooked because it doesn't directly threaten the interests of powerful countries.
Right.
But for the people of Sudan, the suffering was immense.
It's hard to imagine what they went through.
Yeah. The Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces were battling for control.
Fighting over power and
Of the
resources.
civilians caught in the crossfire.
It's just heartbreaking to think about.
It is. And the worst part is there are no easy solutions.
Why is that?
Because this is a really deep-rooted conflict with historical grievances, ethnic tensions, competition for power, all tangled up.
I see.
Unless there's a genuine commitment from all sides to find a political solution, the violence is likely to keep going.
It just goes to show that while we might be fixated on the big players on the world stage, there are so many human tragedies unfolding that we don't even see.
Absolutely. And often those tragedies are directly linked to the actions or inactions of those global powers.
And so we've got a Middle East on edge, Trump's back in the White House, shaking things up, and a forgotten crisis in Sudan, but 2024 had one more major blow to deliver.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, it's the elephant in every room, no matter where you are in the world.
What are you talking about?
The climate crisis. We can't ignore the fact that 2024 was the hottest year on record, as both National Geographic and The Guardian reported.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't just about scary numbers on a chart.
Right.
We saw the consequences play out in some terrifying ways.
We did, from those insane wildfires that ripped through entire landscapes to those catastrophic floods that displaced millions of people. The impact of climate change was impossible to miss.
It felt like the planet was screaming at us.
Yeah, and while there's a growing movement demanding action, there's also a lot of pushback, especially from those who prioritize short-term economic gain over long-term sustainability.
You just don't get.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions, but one we absolutely can't afford to keep ignoring.
So to recap, 2024 gave us a Middle East teetering on the brink of collapse, the return of a wild card like Trump on the world stage, a humanitarian crisis in Sudan that was largely ignored, and the ever-present threat of climate change rearing its ugly head.
It was a lot.
It was a year that showed just how interconnected our world is and how the choices we make or fail to make have ripple effects that can be felt globally.
It really highlighted the need for global cooperation and understanding.
And that's exactly what we're going to explore further in the next part of our deep dive, how these seemingly separate events are actually intertwined and what it all means for everyday people.
I am ready when you are.
Stay tuned, because this is where things get really interesting.
It's really easy to just get caught up in all those headlines. But the interesting thing here is how all these seemingly separate events are actually all connected.
Oh, yeah.
It's like one of those giant, complex webs where if you tug on just one little thread, it can shake the whole structure.
Okay, so let's untangle this web a bit.
Okay.
We've laid out some pretty heavy stuff here. A volatile Middle East, Trump's back, a forgotten crisis in Sudan, and the looming threat of climate change.
Right.
But what does it all actually mean for the average person listening?
Yeah, why should we care about something happening on the other side of the world? Well, that's the key question, isn't it? In today's world, we're all connected whether we realize it or not.
Okay, so how are we connected?
Well, just think about it for a minute.
Okay.
The products you buy, the food, you eat the gas you put in your car, it all comes from somewhere, right?
It does.
And those supply chains, those intricate systems that get us those things, they can be easily disrupted by conflict or instability anywhere in the world.
So you're saying that something as simple as my morning coffee could be affected by something happening in the Middle East.
Exactly. And it's not just about our stuff either.
What else?
Our security is also deeply intertwined with what's happening globally.
Okay, in what way?
Well, for instance, the rise of extremist groups, like what we could see in a place like Syria, that could lead to an increased threat of terrorism both at home and abroad.
It's kind of scary.
It's a sobering thought for sure. It's easy to feel powerless when you think about these big global challenges.
It is. Like, what can one person really do to make a difference?
Well, that's where informed action comes in.
Okay.
The first step is understanding the issues, which is exactly what we're doing right now.
Right.
Once you've got that knowledge, you can start making more conscious choices.
So knowledge is power, but it's what we do with that knowledge that really counts.
Exactly. It can be as simple as choosing to support businesses that align with your values, reducing your own environmental footprint, or even just starting conversations about these issues with friends and family.
Just raising awareness.
Yeah. Don't underestimate the power of influencing those around you.
It's like those small everyday actions adding up to create a bigger wave of change.
Right. And it can also mean engaging in the political process, advocating for policies that address these challenges, and holding our leaders accountable.
So we're not just bystanders. We can actually shape things.
Absolutely. You have more power than you think.
That's actually pretty empowering.
It is. And while we can't ignore the very real challenges facing our world,
Right.
it's important to remember that there are reasons for hope, too.
Okay, so what are some of those reasons for hope? What positive developments did you see in 2024?
Well, for one, we saw some pretty significant advancements in renewable energy technologies.
Oh yeah, like what?
Solar and wind power are getting more efficient and more affordable, and that could be a total game changer in tackling climate change.
So there's hope that we can ditch those fossil fuels and create a more sustainable future.
That's the idea, and we also saw incredible examples of grassroots movements and individual activism actually making a difference.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
People coming together to tackle issues like poverty inequality and environmental degradation.
Right?
They're finding innovative solutions from the ground up.
It reminds me that even in the face of these global challenges, human ingenuity and compassion can prevail.
I agree. It's all too easy to get bogged down in negativity, but it's important to remember that change is possible and it often starts right where you are.
Okay, so we've talked about how all these global events are connected, how they can affect our lives, and how we can actually make a difference. So what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away from all this? It's the one key takeaway. We've covered so much ground,
We have.
but I'm still left with this feeling of like, what now?
What now?
Yeah, we know there are all these huge forces at play shaping the world in some pretty dramatic ways, but where do we even start to make sense of it all?
I think the most important thing to remember is that even in a world facing all these huge challenges, we still have the power to create positive change.
We do.
Absolutely. It starts by understanding what's going on, connecting the dots, recognizing the patterns.
So it's not about having all the answers right.
Right.
It's more about being curious, asking questions, looking for those connections.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions.
Okay.
To really question the narratives you're hearing and seeing. The world is messy and complicated, and there's rarely just one right answer.
Right?
Look for those nuanced perspectives, the ones that make you think, I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah. I think it's so easy to just get caught up in all the doom and gloom headlines
It is.
and feel like it's all just too much to handle.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that we actually have a lot more power than we think.
We do.
We do. Your choices matter.
They do.
They do. Your actions have a real impact, whether it's supporting a local cause,
Okay.
making more sustainable choices in your daily life, or engaging in thoughtful political conversations.
Right.
You can be a part of the solution.
So it's not about getting overwhelmed by the problems. It's about focusing on what we can control,
Right.
the little steps we can take to make a difference.
That's it, exactly. It's about shifting our mindset from helplessness to possibility.
I like that.
We might not be able to single-handedly solve climate change or bring peace to the Middle East,
Yeah.
but we can contribute to a more just sustainable and peaceful world in our own ways.
That's a great point. It's about focusing on those little ripples of change, knowing they can eventually build into something much bigger.
And remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many people and organizations out there
Oh, yeah.
working so hard to make things better.
So what should we do?
Find those communities, connect with like-minded people, support the things you care about.
It's about finding those points of connection where our passions meet the needs of the world.
That's it. And never underestimate the power of hope, even in the darkest of times.
Hope.
Hope is what fuels our actions. Hope drives us forward. Hope is what ultimately makes change possible.
That's beautiful. So we've reached the end of our deep dive into 2024.
Oh, wow.
A year full of challenges for sure,
It was.
but also, as we've talked about, full of possibilities.
Possibilities for sure.
We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer picture of the big events that shaped the year, how they're all connected, and most importantly, how they affect your own life.
It's been great exploring these complex issues with you.
It has.
And remember, this is just the start of the conversation.
And to everyone listening, keep digging deeper, keep asking questions, keep those conversations going.
Absolutely.
We'll have some links and resources in the show notes to help you get started, because the more we understand about the world,
Yeah,
the better equipped we are to create the future we want to see.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Now.